Rightio, how we going? Today, another beautiful day at Jimi's. Today I'm talking about, just briefly, on overdraws. The overdraws have been mentioned in a few of the response from the videos. When I was shooting seriously 18, 20 odd years ago, overdraws were a big deal. Everybody was using them. I never did, but everybody else, a lot of people were. And basically what it boils down to is that if you've got, say, a 28-inch arrow and your rest sits there on the arrow, with an overdraw, back then they didn't have any restrictions on the length. So guys would having overdraws that were 100 mil long. So instead of the arrow sitting there, your rest is here. Now what that means is, for example, I shoot a 410 carbon one with a 100 grain tip. Because I only shoot 54 pound, I go for the lighter stuff as much as I can to get the velocity so I don't have to pull 60 pound. Now what it means is, say for example, if this was a 410 at 28.5 inch length, which is what I use on my bow, and the arrow's sitting there, that's right, spine weight's beautiful. Now if I was to put an overdraw on and bring my rest back to here, I can cut 4 inches or 100 millimeters off the front of that shaft. So what that means is I can go from maybe a 410 to maybe a 600 or even 650 shaft, which saves me grain weight in the length of the arrow, an arrow size, an arrow profile, because they'll be a smaller profile, which gives you arrow velocity. And that was purely the reason overdraws were brought out, was for arrow velocity, because I've shot with guys years ago that were shooting 60 pound bows with 24-inch arrows, and their arrow speed was insane. They were virtually not making any sight adjustment from 70 down to 50 meters because the trajectory was just so flat. The problem with overdraws is they can be dangerous because it actually puts the tip of the arrow back behind your hand and your wrist. These days, not such a big deal. The carbon arrows and the arrows these days are far better than they were. Back when I was shooting seriously 20 odd years ago, the only arrows that you risked shooting were ACCs, ACEs or X10s in particular. That's what I shot. Eastern pretty much dominated. Hello, Greg.
Just before you go any further, I heard the word dangerous. And I'm over there shooting with an overdraw, you see there? Instead of there.
This is part of the reason they've restricted this distance, because when I was shooting, guys had rest back here. And if you have a failure on an arrow, the only place it's going to go generally is through your hand. Here's not such a big deal because it's a lot closer to the actual point. It's maybe 60 mil, I think that's the maximum now, isn't it? 60 mil? 65. Well, like I say, back 60, when it was way back here.
60.
60, okay. Yeah.
I'm a judge.
So it's not such a big deal. We've got the hand there. The biggest issue is an arrow failure back here can cause a problem, but that can happen anyway. Like I say, back 20 years ago, the X10s were the only arrow to use. There was the full carbon arrows 20 years ago were actually quite dangerous. Not many people used them.
Do you remember that the old overdraws used to come with a guard?
Yeah, they did. They had like a loop on them, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, some kind of guard.
That's right.
Your hand.
But now, where we are now with carbon arrows, the solid carbon arrows these days, I don't have an issue. They're safe as. The quality of the carbon's so much better. Like I say, that back then they were dangerous and people didn't use them.
Have you explained this fulcrum point here?
Well, and another issue with overdraws, good point, Greg.
Thank you.
I might just borrow your bow to show that.
Yep.
What you should do ideally with your rest, when it's set up normal off your riser, what happens when your arrow's sitting on a normal rest up the front, it's virtually at the balance point of your wrist. And this is another reason too in regard to arrow length. If you have your arrow too long, it exaggerates how far out it is when it actually leaves the bow. This is why you've got to have it back here at this point here. Now what happens with an overdraw, because you're back here and you tilt your wrist, it actually moves further than what it would normally, pivoting at your wrist point. That movement there.
This way like that.
That's right. It actually moves a lot further. And it gets back to what Greg mentioned, that overdraws aren't less accurate. They are a lot less forgiving and a lot more sensitive. It doesn't mean you can't shoot as well with an overdraw as with a normal position, but they are less forgiving purely because of that pivot point. Makes a lot more significant movement on your arrow than what it does if it pivots up the front, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, and conversely, this is the pivot point here. This is where it's going to pivot. So any further back, that's going to be amplified, but any further forward, that would be amplified. So if your rest was out here, any movement's going to magnify that little distance. So you really want your rest to be right where your fulcrum point is, to be perfectly
Yep.
free of those errors.
Agree 100%. But then that all comes down to your bow hand again. If you don't torque that bow hand and you have that limpness in your bow hand, should not be an issue. That's pretty much covered the overdraw issue, but a few of you guys that touched on it had it there. It's purely for arrow speed, there's no question, because you go back to that shorter, lighter shaft, and that was the whole original idea. This is why we're addressing Greg's arrows issues, because there's not a lot of point in having an overdraw and then putting 140 grain tips in the arrows. It really defeats the purpose of it.
It's ridiculous.
It doesn't work. But so we're looking at what arrows are we going, Greg?
In what respect? These are 120. These.
Yep, they shoot really well now, don't they? They're good.
Yeah.
So what are you going for your next lot?
Well, Jimmy's got an experimental type.
I do have an experimental type for you, the VAPs.
The VAPs.
The
But
VAPs,
they're
yeah.
set up for his overdraw.
You will not take
Yeah.
that off yet. I'll try the VAPs and see how I go.
My money's on
What
X10s. Sorry, I got to back X10s, man. They're the best.
That's all right. It's,
What-
Archery Supplies just wanted us to test them out.
Yeah, really, archery supply.
But the
in South
VAPs,
Australia.
I'm looking at a new set of arrows, and I'm seriously looking at the VAPs.
Well, you might get those after we've road tested them.
I've been using carbon ones, and man, it's hard to fault carbon ones.
They are good.
Oh, for the price of them, they're brilliant.
They're as much as these.
Yeah.
No, I looked it up. I was looking for arrows. I looked
Carbon
it up.
ones have gone up, have they?
Yeah, they're about $215.
Yeah.
Oh.
I actually did some testing yesterday, believe it or not.
Australian.
I had my carbon ones, I had a set of Nano Pros, and I had some cartel triples, and the carbon ones were the best noticeably out of those two.
Yeah, right.
The only issue was that the cartel triples and the Nano Pros were 500s as opposed to my carbon 410s. There may have been an underspining issue, but they were an inch shorter, so I don't know. But they flew a fair bit quicker than the carbon ones because they do have a bit of weight to them, but as far as the groups, the carbon ones were great.
Really?
Yeah. But the VAPs are interesting. I'm even looking at the 166 VAPs. I reckon I might even try a set of them. They look pretty good.
Right. So
Yeah.
after you've viewed this, just down the bottom, just give us your view. We're going to take a vote. How many people think I should get rid of the overdraw?
Vote. That's a great idea.
That's a great idea.
Vote.
Should Greg ditch the overdraw?
Will it help me be even better?